The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good morning, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back for another live stream, continuing with our reading of The Next Million Years by Charles Galton Darwin. I got his name right. I can't call him Charles Darwin because it's not that Charles Darwin, and I keep wanting to call him Francis Galton, but that was a different eugenicist maniac. This is Charles Galton Darwin's book from 1953, and we are cracking on today with chapter, I think we're up to chapter 5, chapter 5. And so it's very good to have you here. If you are tuning in live or watching after the fact on the replay, very good, equally good. Just a reminder, if you're watching on the replay, you can go to the pinned comments underneath the video if you want to skip ahead to get directly to the reading of the text. If you're watching live, you don't have that functionality because time travel has not yet been invented. So you're just going to have to experience this in real time as it unfolds. But that's got its charm as well, hasn't it? Let's be honest. That's the best way to do it. But we've got today in the chat Bitcoin mining, Johnny Fogg and Gwen Weston. Good morning to you all. Johnny, it's your first time catching it live, so extra special warm welcome to you. Our usual broadcast schedule, I suppose, doesn't line up with your free time, but it's very good to have you here. It looks from your picture as well that you might be some sort of musician or singer yourself, so I'm going to check out your page a little later on after the broadcast. But anyway, thanks for being here, and I hope you find this enjoyable, the live experience. Then over on Rumble, who do we have on Rumble? I saw you a minute ago, but then the pinned comment, Turbs. How's it going, Turbs? You are pointing out that I've got a busy day today, so that means you must know something about me. No, I do have a busy day today, which is why our broadcast is happening now at 10 a.m. in the morning instead of our usual slot at 7 p.m. in the evening, because I have something else that I'm doing this evening, another commitment where I will be participating in the Cutting Through the Matrix book club, which is run by Melissa, who is the widow of the late, great Alan Watt. And we are going to be reading Chapter 8 of this little-known book, although some of you may have heard of it. Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time, by Professor Carol Quigley. We're going to be discussing that book, that chapter, specifically, Chapter 8, and it is all about international socialism. So it feeds very much into the work and the reading that we did and the learning from Fabian Freeway, which is the last book we read through on this channel. So I'm very much looking forward to that. But that, because it's a group effort and it spans multiple time zones, we have to commit to that time. And so that is why I've moved things around for the usual Hayes Reviews live reading. But I'm not leaving you hanging. I'm still doing one. I'm still here, even though we might not have our usual numbers because, it's Saturday morning. People have got things to do, right? Families, children, hobbies, places to go, shopping, all that sort of stuff. It takes precedence as well. I get it. I know. We can't all be sitting at home learning from books all day, every day, as much as we might want to. But yes, Turbs, I'm going to be fairly busy today. But good morning and good welcome and a warm welcome to you in the Rumble chat. And nothing much going on Odyssey. I might have to do something about that. Nobody ever seems to show up on Odyssey. But, this is just baby steps, one thing at a time, isn't it? Immune to PR as well has also just dropped into the chat. So good morning to you. All right. So I'm going to dive pretty much straight into the book reading this morning. I don't have anything prepared in terms of a preamble or anything to look at because I'm wondering if we make good progress, we might polish off the next 3 chapters. So what I'll do instead is a sort of off-the-cuff summary of where we've got to so far, just in case somebody's tuning into this video and hasn't watched the first 2. A reminder, I suppose, at that point, though, to say that if you do want to check out these live stream series in their entirety, then you can look at the playlists tab on my Odyssey channel. There's only Fabian Freeway on there at the minute, but if you go to the YouTube channel, you can look at the playlist tab and you can see all 6 books that we have read on this channel so far in their entirety, cover to cover. And you can pick one of those out and catch up, or choose one of those to listen to, in between, while we're in between books or while you're waiting for the next installment of the current book. There's plenty to go out there, multiple hundreds of hours of material. And so, as I was just saying to Johnny Fogg in the chat, it's a good channel it's a good chance to hit that 1.25 speed or 1.5 speed, even if you can handle that. And it's surprising how listenable interviews and recordings and monologues and speeches and podcasts actually are when you speed it up a little bit. You can still get that information, but it doesn't take anywhere near as much time. So playlist tab, you can catch up on the first on the earlier installments of this particular reading and the other books we've done as well. So today this is part 3 today, and so far we've had an introduction from Charles Galton Darwin explaining his methodology and the reason why he was writing the book. That was quite curious because he did mention that his ideas in the book are not going to be referenced. He's not backing this up with evidence. He's not pointing to other books that he's read. There's no bibliography. There's no footnotes. There's no explanation on the back pages of other places to get this information or the evidence which backs up the things that he's saying. No. And he's also not going to tell us the people who influenced his thinking and who gave him some of the ideas that he's coming up with in this book, which is quite curious. This was written in the 1950s, the early 1950s, and I've heard that back then, because these sort of books would be written and circulated within a very small group of kind of elite, educated people, not widely to the public and the Joe and Janes on the street and the plebs. This would be for the in-group, by the in-group. And for that reason, you're writing for an audience who you know what they've already read, and they have the same cultural and knowledge touch points that you yourself have. So it's like telling a story to someone who lives in your town. You're going to tell it very differently than if you're telling it to somebody from China who might not have the same reference points and cultural touchstones that somebody who's from your home will have. Does that make sense? So I think it's curious because this book wasn't written for wide dissemination and wide circulation, and he's getting ideas and input from all these people who he studies alongside. And if you remember, he's very closely connected to these elite families, the Huxleys, the Darwins, the Galtons, the Barlows, and the Keyneses, John Maynard Keynes, his family. And these were all kind of lords and inheritors of titles, and they were given awards by the king, by the queen, given letters after their name. And also he was a member of the Royal Society. And this society is the oldest running scientific society on the face of the planet that is known to anybody. It's been going since the 1600s. And we looked a little bit about that at the start of part 2, last video we did on Thursday. That was very interesting. And if you haven't seen that yet, very much worth going back and checking that out, because that gave us a good window into this mindset. So from my point of view, what we're getting in this book is a peek into the mindset of the kind of people who see themselves as the upper crust in society. They see the rest of us as a herd of troublesome, bothersome, mangy humans that they are responsible for dealing with and handling. And they can find various ways to benefit from that position and that role that they have bestowed upon themselves. And the best sort of analogy would be something like a farmer who is dealing with livestock. There are going to be some farmers who are very loving and caring and kind and compassionate to the animals that are under their care. And they recognize that the best way, or they feel that the best way, is to be loving and appreciative and show gratitude and care to the animals that they're looking after, who, after all, they make their living from these animals. Ultimately, the products and the food and the milk and so on that come from looking after these animals. But there could be a farmer who isn't so inclined towards compassion and care and kindness. There could be a bad farmer, an evil farmer who's malevolent, who's hateful and disregards the well-being of the animals who are charged in his care, because all he cares about is getting those products and exchanging them for profit so that he can benefit his own life and feather his own nest, so to speak. And the condition and the welfare of the animals under his care are therefore not a high priority. All he's bothered about is, how do I fatten them up? How do I get more meat? How do I get more wool, more milk, so on? How can I maximize the product that I can get from these animals in order to maximize the profit that I can make for myself? And I think that second one that I just described is kind of more close, although there's probably a back and forth and a tension. I'm sure there's some people born into these circles, these families, these bloodlines who do have more of a caring bent and more of a kind side and do try and pull things in that direction. But ultimately, in this day and age, it is the psychopath who wins out, because the psychopath has no morals, no ethics, no reason to be good and kind and caring, right? The psychopath is exploiting, is looking for their own angle on things, the way they can benefit, and they're always going to rise to the top, because it's very hard to defend against that unless you have a community of people who are all moral and care about truth and loyalty and decency and honor and integrity and kindness, right? And that's harder and harder to find these days, because the likes of the Charles Galton Darwins of the world, and the Aldous Huxleys, and the T.H. Huxleys, and the H.G. Wells, the Bertrand Russells, the social engineers, the scientific elite who have positioned themselves as sort of guardians of the human race. They want to, in many cases, sow discontent. They don't want strong bonds between people. They want people to be kind of at each other's throats, finding each other suspicious, because then it's easier to pick off weak members of the group and the society. And it's easier to rule over people who are disorganized and chaotic and arguing amongst themselves. It's easier to then stand up in front of them and assert yourself as, you know, the authority in the room that everybody has to listen to. And look at you all, you can't organize yourself and you're so badly behaved. You need us to stand here and tell you what to do and what to think and how to live and to control your lives and make decisions on your behalf. It's because look at you all, you're just bickering and fighting, but at the same time, they don't tell you that they're the ones that have engineered all that tension and chaos and stress by the way that they've designed society and the systems that we are born into, that we have no say over, really. And they give you the illusion that you have a say over it. But let's be honest, when it comes to voting, which candidate is going to dismantle the usury system that is enslaving everybody on the face of the planet pretty much at this point? Which candidate is going to dismantle and write off the national debt? And all these countries in all this national debt all over the world, who do we owe it to? Where's that money going? You know, so it's this system that is built and we are born into and we have inherited has been carefully designed to get people riled up, to get people stressed and fatigued and strung out, so that they turn to things like alcohol or drugs or television or computer gaming or whatever, all these things that are fine in moderation and if you can use them in a controlled way, but many people can't, and you end up losing so much of your precious life to these things, which ultimately don't do anything for you and don't benefit you. And that's great from the point of view of the Charles Galton Darwins of the world, because then they get to write books like this and tell you exactly what they're going to do over the next million years. And that is my sort of intro to say that I feel like even though he writes this book as though it's his predictions based on what he has observed, the principles of human nature and how large groups of humans, how simple principles of human nature can be extrapolated and applied to large groups in order to predict the long-term outcomes. So he's thinking on a very macro scale here. He's telling us that he's using a method of prediction, but I think, reading between the lines, that he's using a method of, this is the plan, and I'm writing it in this book, you know, because that's me reading between the lines, though he doesn't explicitly say that. But when you see that in 1953 he's talking about hormonal injections that will change the intellect and the moral content of an individual's character, yeah. When you see that in 1953 he's talking about we need alternative, scientifically created food sources. Maybe we can make grass and wood edible, right? He's talking about renewable energy. He's saying oil and coal is running out, and nuclear, we can't use that. And so we need wind, and we need ocean power and geothermal power. And he even suggested man-made volcanoes built underground and using them as a source of power, right? So when somebody who wrote a book 71 years ago now, was really on the money with explaining and telling us what happened over the last 70 years, you've got your ears have to prick up and you have to say, all right, was this guy just somehow superhuman good at predicting things, or did he know something we don't know? And judging by the kind of people he rubbed elbows with, I would say he knew things we didn't know. He knew the plan. He knew he had an insight into what was coming and what the goals were of this class of people. So that's my little intro, and that's pretty much brings us up to speed where we got to. The last two chapters, he was talking about how humans can now control the external world, and that's one thing. But what about when we can control the internal world? So for those of you who have been paying any attention at all, scratching beneath the surface of the headlines over the last 4 years, you might have discovered concepts and ideas and movements such as technocracy, such as transhumanism, You might have discovered the cybernetics, the human control of human beings. You might have discovered groups such as the WEF, for example. I hope that didn't trigger an AI censor bot when I said those three letters there. You might have discovered people like Ray Kurzweil and the singularity, this event. And then you definitely have witnessed the rollout of this thing that's being called AI. And they keep throwing this, and this is AI and AI powered, and you're going to have a little AI assistant in your pocket, and you're going to have a little chat GPT who's going to tell you what to think and tell you what is true. And don't worry about remembering information. Don't worry about using your intuition or your own thinking skills. Don't worry about applying the scientific method for yourself and learning how to do that and how to think critically. No, don't worry about all that, because we now have AI who can do all that for you. So just like our smartphones and the use of Google Maps has basically rendered a whole generation of people incapable of reading an actual map or remembering the directions as they are described to them. And I'm included in this, right? Because I have older members of my family, and I'll say, oh, I've got to go to this place. Where is it? And they'll give me a whole list of the precise directions, and then you'll see a church, and then you turn left there, and then about half a mile along that street you'll go under a bridge, and then what you're going to see is a letterbox on the right hand side, and you want to go and they'll describe it, these long journeys across the country. I can't remember all that just from one person describing it to me. So that ability of me to remember directions and road names and how to get from places, I can see in myself has been kind of eroded because I'm so reliant upon this little screen that just tells me where to go and turn left and turn right and do a U-turn, as often happens when you fail to follow the instructions properly. So this technology is not only, it's already eroding our ability to meet each other face to face. How many times do you see people in a restaurant or a coffee shop? They're just staring at the screens. They're not looking at the people who they are there with. They've gone to that place together, and then they sit around a table looking at their screens and their smartphones. I see it all the time. I see people in cars sitting together staring at their phones, and on buses, trains, all these kind of places where people actually get together physically, but they don't physically look and interact with each other face to face, eyeball to eyeball anymore. The screen is there in the way of it. It's inserted itself between dating. How many people rely on dating apps and swipe left, swipe right, Tinder, and various other iterations of that sort of thing. We've got social media, which is the opposite. It's anti-social media. It actually drives a wedge between real life, in-person, human-to-human, heart-to-heart relationships and interactions. So that and all that I just described was before AI. So now that we've got this so-called intelligence, this intelligence that can think and has access, immediate access to the whole internet, all this curated information that is curated. It's not the whole entirety of information. I've got books on my shelves over here that ChatGPT would not talk to me about. And I said, tell me about the contents of this book by such and such an author. That book is very controversial, and it's not a good idea for me to talk about that book. And I was able to bully it into giving me the summary of that book. But if you think for a second that these AI systems and apps are actually trained on truth and verified facts and information that actually reflects reality, then what can I say? Good luck. Good luck out there. So the alarming thing is that now we've got this AI here. What is that going to do? What aspects of our abilities and our minds is that going to further erode? Because we're already in a precarious situation. So what's that going to do next? And Charles Galton Darwin even talks about that. He talks about computing machines, machines that could do mathematical computations, which would be able to predict the future. And therefore, we wouldn't have to make decisions, and we would know what was going to happen. And he basically removes free will from the picture. So he's been talking about this control of the external world, and then he told us that on the next 3 chapters, I'm going to talk about the control of the internal world, the insights and the predictions about what he knows about human nature and what that means for his predictions for the next 1,000,000 years. So a lot of this stuff, as I just said, transhumanism, AI, technocracy, this plan, this movement goes way back, at least to the 1950s, if not even further. And so I'm very excited for the next 3 chapters. And that's why I didn't want to do too much of a rambly long intro here, although we've gone on for half an hour now. So it's probably about time to jump into the books, I would say. Let's have a quick check. Okay, nobody new to say hello to in the chat, so that's all well and good. So I think it's time to go over to the book. Cam, I'll just have a sip of coffee and then we will do that. All right. I am excited for these next chapters. We might only do 2 today. We'll see how the progress goes. If we're feeling good and time is all right, then we might do all 3. But let's see. So the other thing he keeps doing in this book, and this comes up actually in the chapter 7, which is really annoying and frustrates me a lot, is he refers to man as a wild animal. He keeps equating humanity, men and women. Well, we're just another animal, we're just an animal with smartphones, and we don't have. He never talks about the staggering difference in consciousness that we have, and the abilities that we have, the conscious abilities that we have, the creative abilities that we have, the cathedrals that we can build, the technology that we can invent, the stories, the music. Like the capacity of for creativity that the human being has is unparalleled and unmatched by anything in the natural world. Sure, like ants can build a what do you call it? I want to say a hive, but it's not a hive, is it? The nest. Termites can build a big termite mound. Birds can build a nest. You can see animals doing creative things. The birds of paradise and all their dances and all that incredible plumage displays. So little hints of this exist in the natural world with other animals, but nothing on the level of what humans can achieve and accomplish. It's just not even the same. It's not the same category of being, of creature, in my opinion, unless you are a classic sort of Charles Darwin trained scientific materialist, macroevolution believing, rational, elite kind of person like Charles Galton Darwin is here, who I should remind people is Charles Darwin's grandson. So that kind of bugs me that he keeps doing that, but we're just gonna have to put up with it. So let's get into chapter 5. The species Homo sapiens. The central thing that goes on to make up history is not the external conditions of the world, but the nature of man himself. And this will be the subject of the present and the next 2 chapters. Man is an animal, but a social animal, and in discussing him, it is convenient to draw a line between his own inherent nature and the way he is influenced by the society in which he lives. The distinction between these is, of course, only a very rough one, and there is much overlapping. And I'm not sure why the previous owner of this book underlined the word "and." So just remind people, I got this book secondhand, and these underlinings are not mine, although I have added some to it as I go through. I am putting these tabs in, but just in case you're thinking, why is Nick underlining the word "and" there? Is he so impressed with such a basic piece of linguistic grammar? In the present chapter, I shall regard man as a biological specimen like any wild animal, and in the next, I shall consider how he is influenced by the society round him. But then, the important question arises as to the balance between these rival influences, and that subject is reserved for the chapter following. One of the interesting recent developments of geology has been the possibility of dating the past with far greater accuracy than could be done before. Several different methods have been applied which agree in their broad results, but I shall not go into them here. The dating has been specially accurate in relation to the recent ice ages, and this means that it can be applied with some confidence to existing animals and plants. So I'm not sure what dating method he's talking about here, and this is the problem with him writing a book and not backing it up with any references or explanations or footnotes. We have to just take it on faith that this dating is accurate. And I think a lot of people do. And it's an example of what I talked about in the first video, which was scientism as a religion. A lot of people just assume that somebody says, it takes 35 million years for this plant to evolve into a frog or whatever. And people just believe it because they get bedazzled and wowed by huge numbers. And that is a tactic that's done on purpose. Incredibly small numbers or incredibly huge numbers are used to add weight and authority to science, basically. And what are the methods and how do we know they're definitely reliable? And does everybody agree that they're reliable who has looked into it and assessed them critically? Okay, so these are the kind of questions that you got to bear in mind when we're reading these sort of assertions, or at least that's what pops up for me. Because when you've been lied to so much and you've been lied to about so many things, you then have to start being extra cautious about it, about recognizing what it is that you actually believe versus what it is that you actually know, because you've done the due diligence to go out and verify it and analyze it in a logical way with some sort of system, such as the classical trivium or the scientific method, right? And a lot of people don't like to be reminded that the most of what they think they know is actually just is actually belief and faith-based. I think most people do, especially a lot of atheists who consider themselves rational, sensible, and logical. They wouldn't like to confront the fact that probably a lot of what they think they know is actually just a belief in something that they've been told and having faith that it is true, because why would the television lie to me? One of the things discovered from the study of the remains of this period is the answer to the question, in the evolution of life, how long does it take to make a new species? The answer is 1 million years. There you are. No footnote, no reference, no explanation, just that is it, a fact. That's the fact. That is the reason for the title I have chosen for this essay. For 1 million years to come, we have got to put up with all the defects in man's nature as it is now. So he's suggesting, reading between the lines, that the plan is to make a new species, one that is free of the current defects. And what are these defects? Hopefully he's going to tell us. It is hardly necessary to say that there is nothing very exact about this 1 million years. Some species change more quickly and some more slowly, but it does seem to be a good rough rule, and curiously, it seems to apply more or less irrespective of the number of generations in the 1 million years, which of course would be immensely more for an insect or a rat than for a buffalo or a man. The 1 million years may perhaps not be a very close estimate. It might even prove to be only 500,000 or possibly 2 million for man, but it is hardly possible it should be as short as 100,000 years. So it is good enough to assume that it is 1 million years, and if this is an overestimate, the reduced length of time is still long enough to give a fair average of human history. It is a vexed question exactly what the word species means, and many answers have been given, but perhaps the best answer so far was that given by the cynic who stated, quote, "A species is what a trained taxonomist says is a species," end quote. This does not seem to advance the subject very much, but it is a fact that the trained taxonomists, who have frequently disagreed among themselves about other species, are all agreed that the species Homo sapiens includes all the races of humanity. There are, however, obvious differences of complexion and feature among them, which constitute varieties of the species. Since in the history of evolution a variety is the starting point for the formation of a new species, it might be imagined that, if one of the several races were completely isolated from the rest, it would slowly turn into a separate species. But there is no chance of any such isolation. And anyhow, if it should occur, it would take 1 million years to make the species, and so it would fall beyond the span of time I am considering. It is natural to believe that, when there are such obvious differences of complexion between the various races of man, there should go with these some differences in brain and in mental characters, but the psychologists and anthropologists have found it difficult to detect them. In mental characters, the range of variation inside each individual race is very wide indeed. So much so that it entirely submerges any difference in racial characters, if there should be. So it is not useful to give any consideration to differences of race. In every race, there are highly intelligent people and very stupid ones, and all mankind display the same characteristics of pugnacity, ambition, envy, laziness, selfishness, unselfishness, loyalty, kindliness, sociability, sense of humor, and so on. There are, of course, obvious differences in behavior between individuals on account of differences of condition and of training or education, which I shall discuss in the next chapter. But it is correct to say that man really is one species, and that as such it will take 1,000,000 years before anything notably different will arise in his nature. This is a fixed point, which can be taken as the central thing that makes possible the prediction of his history for 1,000,000 years and no longer. As an animal, man is subject to all the rules of heredity, the general principles of which have been fully worked out, even though much of the detail is still unknown for the human species. Of course, it has always been obvious that there is a natural tendency for offspring to inherit qualities from their parents, but the principles, discovered about 100 years ago by Mendel, though not widely known till the present century, have defined the situation very much more precisely. This is not the place to go deeply into the subject, and I shall only cite a few points which are germane to my purpose. The central feature of the Mendelian theory is the gene, which is the unity of heredity. A gene is usually only recognized by its effect on the bodily development of the animal, but the chromosomes in the animal's cells, which are strings of genes, are easily visible under the microscope, and in some cases the position of a gene on its chromosome is fairly well known. So it may be said that the genes are particles of living matter, which are very nearly visible. The germ cell of every animal contains a very large number of genes, and these dictate all the details of the animal's development, such as whether it is to be tall or short, light or dark, and so on. There are known rules, some of them quite complicated, but still perfectly definite, which determine how the genes are handed on from one generation to the next. The new generation has to have a complete outfit of genes, and this it accomplishes by drawing each of them from its father or its mother, but not from both. It is pure chance which parent contributes any particular gene. So the offspring contains a mixture of the genes of its parents, and therefore develops a mixture of their qualities. The genes of man, like those of every other animal, control the development of every part of his body, and this includes his brain. And since the quality of the brain determines all the natural mental characteristics, these also fall under the control of the Mendelian laws of inheritance. There is no doubt of this. But it must be confessed that up to the present time, little is known about the detail of the actual genes of humanity. So it's pretty standard stuff so far. I think this is like what you get told in secondary school or high school. It is through the inheritance of qualities useful in the struggle for life that natural selection works. But, with the old vague ideas about heredity, it was rather hard to see how a race of animals could be really benefited by any valuable character that might appear in one of its members. This animal's mate would not usually have the character, and so, according to the old ideas, the offspring would be expected to have it to half the extent of the favoured parent, the second generation to only a quarter, and so on. It seemed, therefore, that the character would be rapidly diluted in the succeeding generations, and it was hard to see how, in the long run, it could retain enough value to give any significant advantage. This difficulty is cleared up by the Mendelian law. The parent with the valuable character has a gene for that character, which it transmits, on the average, to only half its offspring. But those that do receive it to the full, and the rest do not get it at all. Thus, for those who get it, there is no dilution in the quality. It continues at full strength, and is able to give to its possessors the full advantage that it confers in the struggle for life. There is thus a good prospect that the valuable quality may, so to speak, become anchored to the species by being incorporated among the genes of the majority of its members. if a dictator should ever aspire to bring about some really permanent change in humanity, he could do it if, and only if, he knew how to alter some of the human genes. For only so could the changed quality become anchored as a fixed character of the race. So all you would-be dictators out there, I hope you're paying attention. He's giving you some advice here. You can definitely feel the interest and loyalty and belief in eugenics and dysgenics kind of seeping through the page. Genes retain their constant character for many generations of the animal cells, but they do occasionally change. And it is by the accumulation of these chance mutations that a new species may arise. So this is Darwinian macroevolution 101. Recently, it has been found possible to increase very much the frequency with which mutations occur, so that one might aspire to make much more rapid changes in the characteristics of an animal species than those which occur in nature. The method is to expose the germ cells to X-rays or to certain chemicals, which disturb the process of cell division, so that the new cells may possess one or more changed genes. All right, so if you remember on Charles Galton Darwin's Wikipedia article, it talked about how he was kind of a pioneer in X-rays and developing different methods and new kinds of ways to use it. So it's no surprising that he's coming up with I'm mentioning them here. And what he's saying is, let's increase random mutations by applying X-rays or chemicals which disturb the process of cell division. So he's kind of saying that because new species arise by the accumulation of chance mutations, therefore, if we can accelerate chance mutations, we will get a new species faster. And this is the idea probably underlying a large amount of the human experimentation that has gone on. There has been the records of which have been declassified as time has gone on as well, but not many people know about in the mainstream or talk about in the mainstream. But that's kind of the idea behind it. If we just keep pushing these random mutations, then maybe we will get a better, an improved version. But of course, how often does a random mutation in something actually improve it? You know, and this is part of the thesis of a book I have up there, The Evolution Cruncher, which debunks this thoroughly in 1,000 pages, using the quotes of scientists, largely debunks the idea of Darwinian macroevolution. So that's not to say that natural selection on a micro scale doesn't work, because obviously it does, because, you know, parents pass on, their children look like the parents, and the environment that a particular group lives in is going to have selective pressures on who can and cannot survive. Of course, that happens on the micro scale, but on the macro scale, does seaweed eventually become a millipede? Hard to believe, if you ask me. Hasdak says, get on with it, man. Yeah, sorry, too much rambling. Oh, Katie Lane's here. Good afternoon. Morning, sorry, we're still in the morning. But yeah, welcome. Good to see you here on a live. All right. The process is in no way controlled by the experimenter. The X-rays simply stir things up so that an arbitrary change results, which he can then study and exploit. So just bear this in mind as well. Next time you're getting an X-ray, or if you're working through a scanner, maybe at an airport, for example, that these things can cause random chance mutations which are in no way controlled by the experimenter, and they produce arbitrary results. Quite a number of mutations have been produced in insects by these means, but most of them have been deleterious. Okay, bear that in mind. Most of these random mutations are deleterious, okay? It's not going to stop them doing it, because they only need to find that one random mutation that's beneficial. But that's very key admission there. It's not like it's half and half. Half of the time something good happens and half of the time something bad happens, so it's a 50-50 chance. No. I mean, if you think about how complex an organism is and you just go in and you change something, think about a computer program, right? If you just go in and just smash the keyboards and put a load of extra characters into a random part of the programming code for a computer program, the chances are you're just going to mess the whole thing up and nothing in that program is going to work. That's very possible. So it's the same sort of approach. This is not surprising because an animal is a very delicately balanced mechanism, with its constitution continually kept up to the mark by the stringent conditions of life, and a large change in any part of its structure is far more likely to upset the balance than to improve it. There you go. That's what I said. Similar changes could no doubt be induced by X-rays in the human genes, but there too it is far more likely that the consequence would be deleterious than beneficial because of the upset of the balance of human qualities. To make any large beneficial change in one step, it would be necessary to make favorable changes simultaneously in several genes, and there is practically no chance that an X-ray dose could do this, without, at the same time, damaging some of the other genes in the human germ cell. Even if we knew what we wanted, the prospects of improving human nature in a single step, or even in several steps by artificial means, are so small that they can be left right out of account. The only prospect of improvement must be by taking advantage of the rare occasions when a small, beneficial mutation happens to arise. Even without mutation, there is a tendency for animals to degenerate, and this in spite of the constancy of the influence which each gene exerts in the formation of the animal's body. The reason is that in many cases, several genes have to cooperate together for the correct formation of one of its organs. The classic example is the eye of the fruit fly. This develops under the simultaneous control of many separate genes, and in consequence, it can exhibit a great variety of defects, each attributable to the lack of one or more of them. In the laboratory, these defects can be preserved and studied, but in wildlife, natural selection is continually destroying the insects with bad eyes, and thus the species is being kept up to the mark. This example suggests a speculation about the human eye, though of course that is an entirely different and much more wonderful organ than the eye of the insect. Man's life depends very much on his eyesight, and in the long past, anyone with defective sight would have had a distinctly lowered chance of survival. Nature must have been continually keeping the human eye up to the mark in this way. But 15 generations ago, spectacles were invented, and at once some eye defects, such as short-sightedness, ceased to be a serious handicap. There is thus now no check against short-sightedness, and it is a fairly safe forecast that in another 100 generations or two, this defect will be even commoner than it is now. This speculation illustrates how any human quality may be expected to degenerate unless it is being disciplined all the time by the stringent test of natural selection. There is one other principle in the laws of heredity which calls for special comment here, since, though it is familiar to biologists, it is often unrecognized by laymen. It is known as the principle of the non-inheritance of acquired characters. This signifies that any change acquired by an animal during the course of its life is never passed on to its offspring. The simplest example is a mutilation, but the same rule applies to a skill of any kind that the animal learns during the course of its life. The subject has been hotly debated among biologists during the past 70 years, and all authoritative opinion is now agreed that such effects are not inherited. So that's 99% of scientists agree. However, it is almost impossible ever to prove a negative, and at intervals new examples are still cited, which are claimed as showing that characters acquired by an animal during adult life have been handed on to the offspring. Most of them do not stand the test of close examination, but even if there should be a residue of valid examples, and there is no reason to believe that there is, it is safe to say that a phenomenon so difficult to prove and so rare in its occurrence cannot have played any important part in the development of life on Earth. The non-inheritance of acquired characters is just what would be expected from the Mendelian theory. The new generation derives its genes from those of its parents, and these parental genes were laid down before the parents were born, and they will not in any way have been affected by his and her later experiences, including those experiences which occurred before the procreation of the offspring. It may appear It may appear surprising that it took so long to establish definitely such a simple principle as this of the non-inheritance of acquired characteristics, but closer consideration shows that the matter is rather more subtle than might appear at first sight. Many genes govern quite straightforward qualities, such as the colour of a man's eyes or the fact that after 20 years he is to start growing a red beard. But there are others which are by no means so obvious, such as those that determine tendencies of character. These tendencies may never exhibit their effects at all, unless an appropriate external situation should arise to evoke them. This may be illustrated by an example. Dogs vary very much in the ease with which they learn tricks, but the dog with this gift will never show it unless he is taught the tricks. The tricks themselves are obviously acquired characteristics, but the ease of learning them may be innate. A naive observer might think that the puppy learnt the tricks easily, because its parents had been taught many tricks, whereas actually all that has happened is that the parent did the tricks because it had the innate capacity for learning them easily, and it has handed on this innate capacity to its offspring. Notice the contrast in the action of the dog's trainer according to whether acquired characters are inherited or not. Suppose that there are two puppies of the same litter, and that one of them learns tricks much more easily than the other. The second would need far more training than the first, and if the trainer really believed that acquired characters were inherited, he would expect that the descendants of the second dog would reflect the consequence of this greater training by themselves being easier to train. Actually, of course, the exact opposite will be true, since the descendants of the dog which needed little training will learn the tricks more easily. This example illustrates a point of immense importance to humanity that is all too often overlooked. I shall return to it in the next chapter. The Mendelian laws are perfectly precise, and I have been describing them almost as though they had the same sort of certainty as the fundamental laws of physics, and I have not yet taken much notice of the element of chance that enters into them very intimately. This element, of course, arises from the way in which the offspring derives half its genes at random from one parent and half from the other. To those who are not very familiar with the principles of probability, it may appear that this fact will spoil the force of the whole argument, since chance means uncertainty, and therefore it might appear to destroy the validity of any law. Furthermore, the matter goes very much deeper, for pure chance plays a great part in all the subsequent life of every animal, as well as in its procreation. So it might well be asked, what is the use of being so definite about the laws of heredity when they are always going to be dominated by the fortuitous circumstances of the animal's life? Such reasoning overlooks the influence of large numbers, which will reduce the most wildly various individual experiences to a nearly steady average. Since there may be readers who are not familiar with the extraordinary cogency of arguments based on probability, I shall devote a little space to the subject, and in the course of it, a number of other points of interest will emerge. So, where's my pencil? This bit's very key, because he mentioned this in the intro, and what he was saying is, forget the individuals, forget the outliers. What we want to look at is the average, and then we'll extrapolate out from that, because the average is the only thing that matters. Everything else is fluctuation and is not important. Which, do you, is that, does he consider himself an average member of the human race, for example? Would he agree that his contribution and his work and his part that he plays in society is to be disregarded as a fluctuation because he's not bang on the average of everybody else? You know, this way of looking at it, reducing it down to an average, is kind of psychopathic in a way. But that's what he's saying. He's saying there's no differences between people, and forget the differences. There's no differences between the races, no differences between countries and cultures. It's just one world, one human species, and the average of that human species is what I'm looking at. And we're going to just overlook and disregard all those differences and the rich tapestry and variety that makes up the human species. That's what his methodology is, at any rate, which suggests he doesn't put any value on those things. Oh, and the other thing that I should mention as well that this made me think of was a bit further up here, I think, about the role of pure chance and uncertainty and chance. So his worldview is one of scientific materialism, where we're just a bunch of cells banging together, atoms banging together and bouncing off each other chaotically, with no order, no plan, no design in particular. So it's a very atheistic, scientific, materialistic worldview in which a mechanistic, that's the other word that goes in there as well. It's a mechanistic situation, but I don't even think that is what he's saying here, because a mechanism implies a designer and a creator, right? So he's kind of saying more like it's random chance things bouncing together and bouncing off each other, random mutations, random selection of genes for the offspring of parents. It's all chaos and randomness with no meaning or purpose or design behind it. So that's the kind of mindset you have to have in order to be this eugenicist, elitist, scumbag, scientific sort of priest of the scientism religion. The fortuitous occurrences in the events of life are what mostly attract our attention, but in the long run, it is the law of large numbers that counts, the law that the result of a large number of chance events tends to approach towards an average. For example, the player at the roulette table remembers chiefly the occasions on which he made large gains or losses, and he is apt to forget that in a lifetime of gambling, the actual result will almost certainly be that he has lost a small percentage of his total stakes, the percentage levied because the roulette board has a zero number, which biases it slightly in favor of the casino manager. The house always wins. In the long run, it is this bias that counts, and the life of the human race on Earth is certainly to be counted as a very long run, so that the bias is to be reckoned as the really important thing in it, and not the chance good or ill fortunes of individuals, or even of nations and races. At the risk of over-elaborating the matter, I will take another example from games of chance which brings out some interesting points. 5 men sit down to a game of pure chance, each contributing the same capital sum, and they play according to the rule that anyone retires when he has lost all his capital. It is then a certainty that in the end, one of the 5 will win the capital of all the others. It is, of course, pure chance which of them it will be. If the stakes allowed on each hand are a large fraction of the capital, the game will be short, while, if they are restricted to being small, the game may take a long time, but the final result will be the same. Now suppose that the capital of the players is no longer required to be equal. At once there is a bias in favor of the rich man. In the course of the game, each player has ups and downs, but the rich man may sometimes recover from a loss that would have bankrupted the poor man, so that he is definitely more likely to be the winner. The moral of this is that, if there are 2 nations in which the individuals of both have equal merits in the struggle for life, the one with the larger population will tend to have the advantage over the other. In this, I am not considering the fact that the larger nation might enlist more battalions so as to conquer the other. It is just that, through its greater population, it can stand great misfortunes and still come back from them to prosperity, whereas those misfortunes could have totally destroyed the smaller nation. Returning to the game of the 5 players, so just a note on that one as well. Hasdak's going to tell me off again because I keep pausing, but at the risk of incurring the wrath of Hasdak, I didn't expect him to, when he explained the moral, the way I was reading this example of the rich man having better chances in the game, What I was thinking of was this is kind of a message to the bloodlines, the valuable stock, the ones who are born with the right to control and rule and have those positions of authority and control over the rest of us who are not, And this is the key mindset of the survival of the favored races and the eugenicist view on things is that our blood and our conditions is worth more. We have a higher genetic capital, let's say, to tie it into this example here that he's talking about. And I kind of read it as though he's sort of saying, if you protect your stock and your genes by keeping it in the family and marrying your cousins and so on and so forth, like the Rothschilds did. And we learned about that when we read through the Romance of the Rothschilds book. Then you're going to have more capital and you're going to be more likely to succeed in this long game or this long competition called the human race. And what have we seen? Well, we've seen that happen. These houses such as these banking families amassing incredible wealth and maintaining it and protecting it over generations. The Rockefellers is a good example, not a banking family, but these magnates, these oil tycoons, these industrialists, the Warburgs, I think were a banking family, but Rothschilds is just a classic example. They get something and then they protect it and grow it over that long term so that as the game, the human race unfolds and goes on, they further and further consolidate and entrench their own wealth and power and influence so that it becomes impossible to overturn them or remove that from them, right? Because they're playing that long game of planning and looking out to the future, like Charles Galton Darwin's doing here. He's looking out 1 million years into the future. Most of us look out a week, maybe a month into the future. When's the next payday? Maybe we'll look out to the next holiday, maybe on an annual basis. But how many of us look 3, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 years out into the future? How many people are planning every day and orienting their action to serve and benefit the people who are going to be here 100 years from now? Like, not many of us, but these guys are doing it. These guys are writing books for each other and explaining the kind of perspectives and the reasons and the benefits to doing that. Okay. Returning to the game of 5 players, suppose once again that they have equal capital, but that, though it is still mainly a game of chance, there is a small measure of skill in it. It now becomes likely, though not certain, that it will be the most skillful player among the 5 who will win. The skill may be of any kind. It may be that, through greater intelligence, he can better estimate the chances so as appropriately to vary his stake at any stage of the game. Or it may be that he possesses fingers which make undetected cheating possible. I am considering simply who will win the game, not the question of the winner's moral character. If the stakes are high, so that the game is likely to be short, there may not be enough time for his skill to tell, and that he will have little advantage against the operations of pure chance. But if the game takes a long time, it becomes exceedingly probable that it will be the skillful player who will win. The moral of this is that natural advantages in the struggle for life will tell in the long run. For the individual animal or man, the stakes are often too high, so that he may be killed before his merit can show itself. But the history of the world is a long thing, and it is concerned not with individuals, but with large numbers of individuals. Because of its immense scale, the game of life is to be regarded as a game of small stakes, so that it becomes very nearly a certainty that the inherent qualities of the race will be what counts, and not the accidents to which individuals or even nations are exposed. Before passing on, there is one further point to be made. I have explained how the operation of chance becomes comparatively unimportant for large numbers. And it is very pertinent to ask how large the numbers must be. If, for instance, it was only true for millions of millions, it might be felt that in any reasonable span of time, chance would be dominant. Such a very general question can only be given a vague answer, but the answer is that the number usually need not be at all large for the chances to average out. With the typical example of spinning a coin, even a quite small number like 10 will almost count as a large number in the sense that if the coin is spun 10 times, the number of heads will rarely be more than 2 away from 5, which is the average number of heads. In most matters concerned with probability, 3 or 4 count as small numbers, 10 as a fairly large number, and 100 as a very large number. There are, of course, exceptions to this statement, as, for example, when the chance in favour of some very rare occurrence is being considered, but it will do in giving a general picture of the subject. In the light of all these considerations, how does man stand in the animal kingdom in regard to the heritable qualities which are to help him survive? Physically, he is a poor thing, neither so strong, nor so swift, nor so tough as the other animals, nor with effective means of defense. On the physical side, the only claims he can make to any superiority in the animal kingdom are his eyes, which have a refinement of perception above that of all mammals and probably of most birds. His hands, which are of one of the most versatile and delicate tools in nature, and the gift of speech, which has such tremendous social importance. But these things are relatively trivial, since the essential point of man, the new phenomenon in nature, is his intellect, associated with his enormously exaggerated brain. So again, this is like the highlighting of the intellect as the highest value and the most important aspect and the thing to be raised up above other things such as compassion, sociability, empathy, love, kindness, creativity. No, it's the intellect. It's the rational mind, the ability to detach and think logically and not be emotionally invested in things. It is therefore in relation to his intellect that all man's other qualities must be considered. In the essential matter of survival, there are 2 things needed: the survival of the individual and the survival of the race. We are all very well endowed with deep instincts for both, and curiously enough, we are ashamed of both these instincts. As to the survival of the individual, we have a very strong, intimate, and deep fear of death, evoked by any form of danger. It is not a thing we boast about, but it is certainly a very essential quality for survival, and as such, it is to be regarded as important and valuable. For the reproduction of the race, there are 2 instincts needed: the sexual and the parental, and the way these are organized is to say the least curious. The sexual instinct, though much complicated by all sorts of taboos, is for most of mankind nearly as violent as the fear of death, though it has the advantage of being pleasant instead of unpleasant. It's kind of strange to refer to the sexual instinct as violent. I think he kind of means strong or powerful, I would have said. Right? Why pick violent? Among animals, it brings about the inevitable consequence of reproduction, and until very recently the same was true for man, so that the Malthusian increase of population was assured. This is still true for a large proportion of the human race, but the existence of birth control has entirely altered the situation among the more highly developed peoples. The consequence has been to make reproduction depend for them not on an intense instinctive impulse, but rather on intellectual reasoning, and this, for very many people, is an exceedingly tepid motive. So that's pretty critical as well, talking about, because the eugenicists often are related and very heavily involved in birth control or reproductive health, as they like to call it. So this is your Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is your Margaret Sanger type characters, and he's saying here that it is your if you want to. He's basically saying if you choose to reproduce and have lots of children, then you're not intellectual, and the intellectual people and developed people. Where does he say developed? The developed peoples. So the developed peoples and the intellectual peoples, they know that reproduction that is not a good thing overall because of Malthus. What was his name? Malthus? Thomas Malthus, wasn't it? So yeah, that's kind of implied in what he's writing here. The parental instinct is also somewhat ineffective because for the majority it is only strongly stimulated by the presence of the children. That is to say, it is very important in preserving them, but it does not make any such claimant call on the emotions to beget them. It has not the same intensive compulsion as the sexual instinct, and this is not very surprising because of its very different function. No one can feel any very intense emotion continuously for more than a short time, whether it is pleasure or pain, anger or grief or fear. The sharp edge of it fades in a few days, whereas the parental instinct has got to work effectively for 15 or 20 years, if it is to serve the survival of the race. It is therefore hardly surprising that it should be steady and continuous, but not so intense an instinct as the sexual instinct or as the fear of death. It is a matter of great importance that the procreative instincts are at present ineffective in maintaining our population, but I shall defer considering this till a later chapter, after some of the other attributes of humanity have been discussed. Besides the instincts that I have dealt with, there are of course many other qualities, some of them not so instinctive, which are important for survival. One may be selected as preeminent. Man is superior to all other animals in his readiness to try experiments. Many of the higher animals, like him, can learn by experience, but if they are placed in an unfamiliar situation, they are lost. Whereas a man will always try to think it out and will often find a solution of his difficulties. That's because the intellect is so great in men. That's why we like to experiment. And as a devout follower of scientism, I'm sure Charles Galton Darwin is not biased in any way when he's writing this. This flexibility... Oh, hang on, let me go back to... No, that's right. This flexibility of mind and the adaptability to unforeseen conditions are the main reasons why he has succeeded in dominating the world. They are possessed to very varying degrees by different individuals, but they are clearly of supreme importance in the struggle for life in an ever-changing world. There are many other qualities which help survival, and I shall be content to mention only a few of them, some estimable and some the reverse. We value intelligence, honesty, capacity for leadership, and other similar qualities, and we mark our approval by selecting their possessors for promotion. Yes, that's how promotions work in this world. A man is promoted on account of his individual merits, without any thought about the consequences for the distant future. In a less abnormal world than the present, his increased prosperity should lead to the man's having a larger family than those of the less prosperous, so that the good qualities inherited from him should gradually become diffused throughout the population in later generations. So this bit here, I can't tell if he's naive or if he's just lying, because it is not intelligence, honesty, and capacity for leadership which leads to promotion, is it? Come on. It's nepotism, it's psychopathy, it's willingness to exploit others, lie to others, manipulate others. These are the kind of qualities that are rewarded. There's studies done to show that CEOs overwhelmingly possess a psychopathic, sociopathic type of mindset and view. So this is, to me, is just a lot of bollocks. And I don't know if he's misleading us deliberately, if he's lying to us, or if he thinks this, in which case he's incredibly naive and we probably shouldn't listen to anything else he says. But let's see. Let's carry on. Where did I get to? So what he's saying, because we promote people for honesty, intelligence, leadership, we also promote them for individual merits, and a promoted man makes more money, increased prosperity, and people with more money should have more children, larger family. But that's not what happens, I think, is what he's going to say next. Yeah, at the present time, the exact opposite happens all too often. So doesn't the fact that at the present time the exact opposite happens all too often, Charles, not tell you that everything you just said up to this point is a load of bunk? I thought this guy's supposed to be smart. Royal Society. in that he is likely to have a smaller family than the average. In fact, success in life is at present antagonistic to success in survival. I shall not consider this further now, since it is to be discussed later. It is always necessary to remember that nature itself is quite non-moral, and that there are many qualities which we by no means admire, which nevertheless are often regrettably effective in the struggle for life. All through the animal kingdom, one of the most successful roles is that of the parasite. And there are states of human society where such a parasite as the professional beggar is as successful as anyone else. I'm laughing because in his worldview, the beggar is the parasite. Whereas in my worldview, it would be, the sort of managerial class as described in detail in the Fabian Freeway book, and this socialistic system we live in, where you have this class of people who do nothing, add no value, produce nothing, and yet they want to be the controllers and the steerers of society, giving the thumbs up and the thumbs down and doling out the food and the resources to the other people and deciding upon which criteria those resources are to be appropriated to each person, right? That is the parasite, the person who adds nothing and produces nothing, and yet considers themselves outside of that process of producing and consuming, right? They want to manage that, the managers. So yeah, it's upside down and back to front what he's saying here. But anyway, something of the kind is unfortunately true in Britain just now. Yes, it is unfortunate that we have all these professional beggars, isn't it? The people we are really encouraging are not those that we think we are. For a great many of the people who get good promotion are contributing less than their share to the next generation. At present, the most efficient way for a man to survive in Britain is to be almost half-witted, completely irresponsible, and spending a lot of time in prison, where his health is far better looked after than outside. On coming out with restored health, he is ready to beget many further children quite promiscuously, and these, quote, problem children are then beautifully cared for by the various charitable societies and agencies until such time as they have grown old enough to carry on the good work for themselves. This sounds like socialism to me. So he was writing in 1953, and this would have been, remember the Fabian Society gave rise to the British Labour Party, which first got into power. It was a stretch of 5 years or 6 years, and I want to say it was like 1945 to 1951, something like that. So this is around the time where Britain had its first ever socialist government. Very interesting that he's writing and making he's making this observation here and basically saying that, yeah, this is what you get when you have socialism, when you tax people, when you take their money under threat of violence and coercion and imprisonment, and then you decide who to dole it out to, right? It is this parasitic type, and I'm not saying like I agree with his characterization of these sort of people and the labeling of them as parasites, right? What I'm saying is when you create mechanisms in society which take resources and wealth from one group and give it to a bunch of people who do not pay into the system and who do not contribute to the system, you create that dynamic where this is enabled and allowed to happen. So people can exploit it by doing exactly what he's just described, right? So it might not be that they are dumb and half-witted. It might just be that they play dumb and half-witted because they recognize that, well, I could work hard and graft and build a business and do something useful and contribute to society. But that sounds like a lot of hard work. What I could do instead is pretend to be a moron, and exploit the system and get handed other people's money that's been taken from them under threat of imprisonment and violence and coercion. So that option is available to people because of the likes of the Fabian Society and the socialism that they wanted to bring in here in the US as well, which we're basically now living in. Okay. We're definitely not getting 3 chapters done today, are we? Hiya, Adam. Welcome. Oh, you're not going to hear this until you've caught up in about an hour and a half's time. But anyway, welcome. Awesome. Where do I get to? It is this parasitic type that is at present most favored in our country. If nothing is done, a point will come where the parasite will kill its host by exhaustion and then, of course, itself perish miserably and contemptibly through having no one to support it. That's quite prescient. That feels like it could have been written in 2024 to describe the situation we're in. Now, though, there may be occasions in human history where something of this kind can happen. There is no fear that it should happen to mankind as a whole. For a parasite is essentially subordinate to some host, and man claims reasonably to be master of the world, so that there is nothing for him to be subordinate to. In the long run, there is no danger of mankind adopting the role of the parasite. Is that so? I'm going to tab this page. I think it's quite interesting, and it ties in nicely to the Fabian Freeway, which was 1966. So Fabian Freeway was probably being written around the time that this came out, right? So a lot of overlap and a lot of connection, and interesting to see their different points of view. I'm just going to stop for a sip of coffee. Couple of quotes on YouTube here. Hasdak says, "Got no plans, just taking it one day at a time." Awesome. I'm glad I've got stuff to help you fill your time with. Let me get back a little bit. Katie says, promoting the notion of one governing body, no need for individual nations. Yeah, that's what it's all leading to. It's the one world government. And this is a good chance to plug the next two books that we're reading on the channel. So once we're done with this one, probably next week, we're going to go into The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. Just on the topic of one world government and having these supranational bodies, you know. I was flicking through this and I found a quote, and it's a very good one, and I'm going to try and find it again if I can. And no, I can't. Of course I can't. Of course I can't find it. But oh, there it is, right there on the first page. Check this out. This is George Washington. Government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force, like fire. It is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. And that's George Washington. So that's the next book that's coming up after this one. Seeing how this, we started with the Fabian Freeway and the Fabian Socialists, and they are adherents to communism by way of socialism, because socialism is the means by which you transform a capitalist system into communism. And that's their long-term goal, their million-year goal, let's say. And they want to establish this on an international scale. Socialism is basically international communism. That's the same thing. It's international in nature. It's technocratic in nature. So this book will be a good stepping stone onto how that has been worked towards, over the last 100 years or so. And then once we've done with this one, we're going to go straight into the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. And this was written in 2012. So this follows on from the Tragedy and Hope work of Carol Quigley. It follows on from Fabian Freeway by Rose Martin, which we read on the channel, as I just mentioned, and then brings us right up to 2012 and has such interesting chapter titles in it, such as Socialism, Fabian Conspiracy, Labour Party, Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House, Royal Institute for International Affairs. Then we got the UN, we got the EU, immigration, multiculturalism, and Islamization. So we have got a very good curriculum coming up on this channel, and I think those three books in toto will probably take us the rest of the year. That's my plan. So that's just a little look ahead to what we're going to be doing. So yes, Katie Lane, I think you're on the money there. Gwen says, Marie Stopes, and has a puking emoji. He's talking about himself, she says. Yeah, I think in many cases, these guys are very egotistical. They write these kind of things as though they are outside and above and beyond the rest of us, the human race, right? Katie says, getting women out to work also limits the birth rate and the establishment and gets them more tax. Yeah, well said. That's a very good point. I agree totally. And then Katie also says, big charities come to mind which take money from ordinary people. Yeah, Yeah, exactly. You know, they're standing there with their buckets and you've got to kindly, usually the people doing it are good people, right? They have no idea the kind of salaries and the bonuses and the life of luxury that the CEOs and the people at the top of these charitable organizations enjoy. But they're standing there, they think they're doing a good thing and they think they're trying to help. And, you know, they're standing in the street trying to stop you and trying to get your credit card details and your payment details and or shaking their bucket, or, you know, it's very insidious, but it preys on people's good nature, as does the tactics of the Fabian Society writ large. It preys on people's sense or desire for justice and fairness and equality and good outcomes for everybody, young, old, sick, poor, rich, whatever. Just noticed we got ESP in the chat on Odyssey. Welcome. ESP has been watching on YouTube but doesn't feel qualified to comment in the live chat. Well, I read your comment out anyway, and that makes you now qualified. So I will send you your certificate, I will sign it, and I'll tell you that you are now qualified to comment. I will give you a knighthood. There you go. Sir ESP, you are now qualified to comment. All right, let's get on with this. Here, aren't we? There is another role, which is not by any means wholly admirable, that may well be specially successful in the struggle for life. This is the role of the hero. Okay, so he just said there's another role, and it is not admirable, and it's the role of the hero. So for some reason, Charles Galton Darwin doesn't think heroes are admirable, which is kind of strange to me. I thought heroes were supposed to be admirable, right? Or I don't know. Maybe I've been not paying attention to the right heroes or something. Sorry, I'm just going to fix this tab because these are not very good. I might have to get some better ones. It was a bit wonky and it looked like it. All right, let's try that. Let's see what he's got to say about heroes. Using the term not in the modern sense of a man embodying all the virtues, but in the original sense used by Homer. Okay. The Homeric hero, who has his counterparts in many other semi-barbaric conditions of life, is brave and reckless, but selfish, undisciplined, and something of a bully. He is by taste a leader, but his leadership is often marred by impatience and lack of persistence, so that he fails to carry through to the end any projects which would take a long time. He cares little for the sufferings of others, unless they are his henchmen, whom he looks after out of self-interest. From the present point of view, one of his most important characteristics is that he is usually by no means monogamous, but very much the reverse, so that his qualities are likely to be reproduced and multiplied many times in the next generation. Is it possible that in the long run the earth should be wholly peopled by heroes? I'm going to say Homeric heroes, just to remind people that that's what he's referring to, which is kind of odd. He hasn't explained why he's referring to the Homeric hero when he knows and admits here that there's a modern sense of the word. I don't know why he's choosing to go with the Homeric sense. Maybe just to confuse, maybe just to communicate something that's going over my head at this time. I'm not sure. It is irrelevant that it would be an extraordinarily disagreeable world to live in, for there is nothing in nature to dictate that the world has got to be agreeable. It does, however, seem unlikely that the heroic type can ever become a large fraction of the Earth's population, because their qualities do not fit into a society of dense population. Rather, they prevent its existence. Whereas the densely populated countries will dominate the Earth by sheer force of numbers. Still, there is certainly a place in the world for the heroic type, in particular for their capacity for leadership, and if this quality could be dissociated from some of the other less desirable characteristics of the hero, there would be a great place for him in society. It is not impossible that such a separation of qualities may come about automatically, because the hero who can adapt himself to the civilized life of dense populations will have a better prospect of survival than the one who can only live in a state of semi-barbarism. This chapter has been mainly devoted to considering the qualities of Homo sapiens regarded as a species of animal, and species of animals stay roughly fixed in type for something like 1 million years. In fact, of course, they are slightly changing all the time, but it takes this period before they are different enough to be given a new specific name. It is fitting to end the chapter by speculating on what man's characteristics will be when, at the end of that period, he is sufficiently altered to be regarded as a new species. And again, there's that word that he's using. He's using that word altered, which to my mind suggests not a naturally occurring process that is random and chaotic, but if you alter something, it implies deliberation, and it implies that someone is making an alteration to something, which I think is him kind of betraying what the true topic of this book is, which is what he and his friends intend to do to the human race. So the alterations that they intend to make. Will he have become Homo sapientior, or what? Or what? Will he have become Homo sapientior, or what? Strange writer, very strange writing. The development of animal species has been studied by means of the fossils of past geological ages, which usually show changes in the animal's form progressing rather steadily through the ages, though the record is often complicated by side branches, which split off into new species or else flourish for a time and then come to nothing. Of course, these apparent steady rates of change have not really affected all the members of the species simultaneously. What has happened is that a few of the animals have chanced to develop a small superiority in some way, say an extra turn of speed, and through this advantage they have left more offspring than have the slower animals. The qualities of the members of a species are always spread over a certain range, and the average of the species is being continually dragged upwards, not through an equal change in all the members, but through unequal reproductivity at the two ends of the range. When Homo sapiens is changing, it will not be by the whole race gaining simultaneously whatever qualities better fit it for survival, but rather by certain types of mankind proving superior to the rest in survival value, so that they contribute a larger proportion to the later generations, and in so doing drag the average qualities of humanity in the same direction. The first question to consider is whether the varieties of mankind, the white, yellow, brown, and black races, may not branch off into different species. In the animal kingdom, such branching has sometimes arisen through long periods of geographical isolation, and another way has been through the development of infertility in the sexual unions between the most unlike members of the species. Neither of these causes will operate in the case of man, since the whole earth is his habitat, and all the races of mankind are fully fertile together. Climate has been another fruitful cause of the splitting of a species into two. Undoubtedly, some of mankind tolerate better a cold climate and some a hot. Will there then ultimately be a Homo arcticus and a Homo equatorialis? It is on the whole unlikely, because man has learnt so well to control his own climates. Even now, Arctic man can live comfortably in the tropics by cooling his dwellings with the help of physical science, and by resting the tropical diseases with the help of medical science. And the converse is equally true of equatorial man in the cold regions. It seems likely, then, that man will not diverge from one species into two on account of climate. Indeed, a convergence is more probable. Thus, although the fair-skinned man can make a success of living in the tropics by taking the trouble to control his climate, his fair skin is still some handicap to him, since it cannot so easily protect him against the direct rays of the sun as would a dark skin. On the other hand, there is not much evidence that a dark skin is a handicap in cold climates. If this contrast of effect is correct, it suggests that in the end, man's complexion will be rather dark all over the world. That's interesting as well. That reminds me of the Kalergi, Practical Idealism, where he talks about the Negroid race, the future Negroid race of Europe. I can't remember exactly the wording on that quote, but that's in Kalergi's book. Count von Coudenhove-Kalergi. He was awarded the first ever Charlemagne Prize for his which is awarded to people who unify Europe and bring it together by getting rid of those fluctuations, those unique cultures and ways of life and cuisines and styles of clothing and behaviors, getting rid of all that, boiling it down to the average, and bringing everybody closer to this state of the future Negroid race of Europe. If you do exceptional work towards that goal, then you get given the Charlemagne Prize, and it has been awarded to some very questionable candidates over the years. And the most recent one is very interesting, so check that out. It's on Wikipedia. You can get a full list there. I've spoke about it a few times on this channel, so I won't go into it again today in too much detail. All right, but that echoes what Kalergi predicts and says is going to happen. And I forget when Kalergi was writing about this, but quite an interesting overlap. Probably worth sticking a tab on. So I'll do that quick. I didn't expect to be tabbing this book so much, but there you go. The physical characteristics of man may of course change with the lapse of time, but it is not likely that they should do so to a great extent, since it is not primarily these qualities that preserve humanity in the struggle for life. Even congenital good health and resistance to disease have been largely discounted by medical science. It is the intellectual qualities of man that really matter, and so it will be these that are the most liable to change. In all such qualities, there will no doubt be a very wide range of variation between individuals, just as there is now, some being clever and some stupid, some good and some bad. And the changes will come about by the increase of the numbers at one end of the range at the expense of those at the other. It is very much a matter of conjecture what those changes will be, and I will only mention a few possibilities. General intelligence should always be of value, particularly the unspecialized intelligence that is adaptable to many varieties of purpose. So, with some confidence, it may be expected that man will become cleverer than he is now. It is by no means so clear that he will become morally better as well, since in a highly competitive world, the sinner has many advantages over the saint. Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier about promotions go to people who are more cutthroat and psychopathic and badly behaved. And so if you kind of extrapolate this out, this reminds me a lot of Mark Passio, his work, because he's working on a scientific paper which states that human freedom, the freedom enjoyed by humanity, has a direct proportional relationship to the morality of humanity. So the more moral we behave, then the more freedom we can enjoy as a species, right? So it's very interesting here that he's saying, well, morality is going to go down, and the implication of morality going down means the condition of human slavery is going to go up, okay? Because it's highly, unbelievably immoral to engage in human slavery, of course. But if morality is going down, then the slavery is going to go up. That is disappointing, but it must be remembered that moral codes have differed a good deal at different periods in history, and it is to be expected that future generations will succeed in constructing a moral code, satisfying to the good man of those days and reasonably close to being within attainment by all, however much it may disagree with our own standards. Another more specialized change may be suggested as probable. Civilization has taught man how to live in dense crowds, and by that very fact, those crowds are likely ultimately to constitute a majority of the world's population. Already, there are many who prefer this crowded life, but there are others who do not, and these will be gradually eliminated. All right, so bye-bye living in the countryside where it's nice and quiet and peaceful. Bye-bye if you want to live into a small village. You are going to get eliminated, my friend. boom, you're out of there. Crowded into big cities, densely populated, probably 15-minute cities, although it doesn't say as much here. But yeah, you're getting eliminated, my son, if you want to go and live in the countryside. Life in the crowded condition of cities has many unattractive features, but in the long run, these may be overcome. Not so much by altering them, but simply by changing the human race into liking them. What? So don't fix the problem. Just alter people, just alter them with hormonal injections that influence your intellectual and moral attitudes, and just condition people into liking these horrible conditions in the cities. That's it. That's all you got to do. Finally, I will refer to another quality, which I shall discuss more fully in a later chapter. As has been already pointed out, man's present procreative instincts are failing to reproduce the species in sufficient numbers in many of the more civilized nations. Any of mankind that overcome this failing will increase at the expense of the rest, and there is already a germ for natural selection to work on in the spontaneous wish of some people for children. Whether this reinforcement of the procreative instinct should be dignified by a new specific name, I do not know, but long before the end of 1,000,000 years, it is almost certain that Homo sapiens will have changed into Homo pedophilus. That's what it says, right? What? All right, I got to reread that bit. I think I might have missed what he was getting at. So this man's present procreative instincts are failing. Okay, so there's a little seed for natural selection to work on in the spontaneous wish of some people for children, and whether this reinforcement instinct should be dignified by a new name, I do not know. But long before the end of 1,000,000 years. Oh, that's, I don't know, quite strange to me, right? I think what he's trying to say is because in his time people didn't want children, he's saying that the people who spontaneously wish for children, they're going to become the next version of Homo sapiens, and that's what he's saying here. I don't know if this word was in wide use back when he was doing his thing. But that is literally what the word means, isn't it? Love of children. Because like philosophy is philosophia. Love of Sophia is wisdom. Philo is love. So, and pediatrics, has the same root. So ped must have a root which means children or young people. So if you've got the ped and then the philo and then that's what he's added together there, those two parts, to get children and love. But it's just, kind of shocking. I don't think he's implying. Again, this is the question. Is it like, did he know what he's just written there? Is he doing it on purpose? Is it something overt and deliberate? Is he just actually a bit numb? Or maybe the use of that, maybe that word didn't have much usage back then, and it wasn't a controversial thing to say. It didn't have a lot of charged emotional connotations to it. It was certainly before the years of, Jimmy Savile and Prince Andrew. Although Charles Galton Darwin did go to the same school as Ghislaine Maxwell went to. So there you are. There's a bit of a connection, isn't there? All right. So I'll have a quick review of the chats, and then we'll plow on, do another chapter, and get out of here. ESB says Joe Biden is a good example of elites preying on good-natured people. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think all the politicians do, honestly. They all do that. They treat you and talk to you like you're a child, and they tell you that. I just find the messaging. In fact, this applies to pretty much everything on television. The way that newsreaders speak, the way that TV show presenters speak, the way the voiceover in advertisements is done. They all talk to you like you're a child. And I think that reinforces the sort of perpetual adolescence, and it makes people feel like they are childish and they need mummy, daddy, government to make their decisions and take care of them and be responsible for them, tell them what to do and where to go, and dole out the money in the right amounts to the right people fairly, and it's it's just kind of silly. So I think that's it. Oh no, hang on, we got Gwen says, wow. Katie says they are building more houses in villages. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Bear in mind, this is 1953, so perhaps the plans have changed a little bit. Katie says they do like to tell us. That's true. Gwen says 70 years ago the word wouldn't have had the same connotations as it does now. Yeah, I thought as much, but it's kind of shocking to read it, isn't it? It is kind of shocking. Gwen says infantilization, in other words. Exactly. That's a good word for it. And then Katie says, look at how Jill praised her husband for answering the questions. What a good boy. I'm not sure which Jill you're talking about. Is that to do with the presidential debate, perhaps? I didn't watch it. I'm not very much interested in soap operas and stage plays and stage theatre these days. But yeah, I think it's good to bear in mind that homo pedophilis would not have had the same connotations as it does now. So that didn't age very well, did it? All right. Let's get back onto the book cam. So we got chapter 6, and then I think we'll call it a day after that. I don't think we're going to get the third one done. So we got another 15 pages to get through, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. So Kate is just confirming Jill is Jill Biden, yeah. And she called him what a good boy for answering the questions. Did she do that on Twitter? What a circus. How does anyone? I think the whole point is to get more and more people incredulous now. There's I forget where I was talking. It might have been in the Hayes Reviews Telegram chat, or it might have been on the Cutting Through the Matrix book club. Somebody in there was saying, or maybe it was Parallel Systems, Parallel Mike from Parallel Systems. Somebody in there was saying that it's like they're now trying to get more and more people to realize and see that the system is just broken and fraudulent. So there might be some event which comes along to trigger the public masses to call for a new system, right? So you got to watch out for that, because it's so obvious and blatant on the face of it, and it has been for a long time, that the people who are being offered to us as political candidates and representatives are not fit for the purpose or the task. They're controlled, they have conflicting interests, they have shady backgrounds, they're liars, they're deceitful, they're crooks, they have fingers in so many dodgy pies. The fact that we're supposed to believe that these are our brightest and best and they care about us and they're going to represent us, and the fact that people buy into it is like mind-blowing to me. But I think they're finally getting ready to make it so obvious and so like even your average Joe and Jane on the street cannot deny the system is broken and totally unfit for purpose. But the question is then that if that's the reaction that they're priming people to have, the reaction of this is broken, this is not working, this is ridiculous, then what is the solution that they have waiting to roll out, right? Because it's always problem, reaction, solution. This is how the planners, the social engineers get their solution rolled out and people to accept it. They have to manufacture a problem and they have to generate a public reaction. And I think it looks, from what I've heard, and I didn't watch any of it, but from what I've heard, it sounds like the public is being encouraged now to react with this incredulous sort of recognition, even though it's been obvious to people who pay attention and read and for quite some time, But finally, they're going to make it obvious and to the normies and the sheepletons out there. All right, let's carry on with creeds. Chapter 6. In philosophical considerations of the nature of life, a question that has been much debated has been the rivalry between nature and nurture. That is the question whether the inherent qualities of an animal or the external conditions of its life are more important to it. In fact, the argument leads nowhere, because when two things are both absolutely essential, it simply has no meaning to ask which is the more important. There is not even a clear-cut separation between them, but a separation can be made, if it is accepted that it is only a rough assignment of emphasis and not a definite splitting of the subject into two. In the previous chapter, the emphasis was on man's nature, and it is now the turn for his nurture, in particular for the way human history may be affected by what a man learns from his fellows. Man shares with the higher animals the capacity for learning, though to an immensely superior degree. The question of how animals learn is much simpler. It has been objectively studied in various ways, in particular by the method of conditioned reflexes, that is to say, by the study of how, by practice, which must always be associated with rewards for success, an animal acquires skill in the performance of tasks which have been set to it. In the experiments, the tasks have often been quite unlike anything that would happen in wildlife, but the results show the general way in which an animal does learn skills, and the same processes, applied to the conditions of the wild state, undoubtedly assist the animal to survive in the struggle for life. The study of conditioned reflexes has brought out clearly the fact that there is a great variability among different individual animals in that some learn skills much more easily than others. This is presumably an inherent quality of the individual, but learning is not always a matter of acquiring skills by individual effort, for it often implies definite teaching. This holds particularly in the case of man, but among animals also teaching plays some part. For example, the catching of mice is one of the important things a kitten must learn in order to fit for the struggle of life, and a cat teaches her kittens how to do it. It may be that sometimes the whole future of a litter of kittens will be prejudiced through their having been taught a bad style of catching mice by their mother. So even among animals, survival may depend on having been taught the right doctrines. The processes of teaching and learning are obviously of immensely greater importance to humanity than to any animal, and the first thing to note is that in the matter of heredity, education must rank as an acquired character, so that it does not come under the Mendelian laws. There can be no genes representing what one has been taught. Nevertheless, as I pointed out in the last chapter, the matter is rather more subtle than this bold statement might be taken to imply. To bring the point out, I will take an example, which is deliberately exaggerated. Suppose there is an earnest believer who holds that acquired characters are always inherited perfectly. He ought to expect that the children of literate parents will be able to read without being taught, or that the son of a Latinist will spontaneously know Latin grammar. In fact, he expects neither of these things, but only for the reason that every single child that has been born is an example to the contrary. Though he has to accept his disappointment, he will nevertheless make the best of things by claiming that the children of literate parents usually learn to read earlier and more easily than others do. In this, he will often be quite right, but part of the reason is only loosely connected with heredity. In part, the result arises from two very general characteristics of mankind: the tendency of the child to imitate what he sees going on around it, and the tendency of parents to want to teach their children. It is true that these are innate characters, so that they will fall under the biological laws of heredity, but they are too general to be invoked for the narrower purpose of the present argument. However, there is a more special application of the law of heredity which can legitimately be used. It is true that there is no gene conferring a knowledge of Latin grammar, but there may well be a gene conferring the type of brain which makes the study of things like Latin grammar congenial, and it is likely that parents who have found Latin to their taste will possess this gene, so that they are likely to pass it on to their children. The question of the inheritance of intellectual qualities is matched by the inheritance of moral qualities, which have to be taught to the growing child in much the same manner by precept and example. And I'll just pause here as well to say, I don't know what people's life experiences are out there, but do you feel that children are born with an innate sense of moral right and wrong, a sense of fairness, a sense of justice? If a child is playing with a toy and somebody comes along and steals that toy from them, throws it on the ground, stamps it into bits, does that child need to be taught how that is injustice and is immoral? Or does the child innately know that is injustice and immoral, right? I mean, I've heard from different people that morality is inbuilt from a young age, but I don't have children, so I haven't had a chance to observe it firsthand. So that's a question really to the parents out there. But he's saying that moral qualities have to be taught in this by precept and example, and I'm not sure that's true. So this kind of suggests he's sort of hinting at like what I would call moral relativism, right? Where you get to decide what is right and what is wrong, and there's no objective standard of morality that applies to everybody. It's just up to you to decide what's right and wrong. And moral relativism is an absolute catastrophe and a recipe for disaster. There still lingers in many quarters the conception of the perfectibility of mankind. And it is so the perfectibility of mankind. Man is perfectible. That reminds me of a quote. One sec. I've pulled this quote and this book up quite a few times. This is the First Fabians. We haven't read this one yet, but it's another book. I think this is a more gushing and glowing review and an explanation of the early Fabians: George Bernard Shaw, Sidney and Beatrice Webb, Graham Wallace, Sidney Olivier, Hubert Bland. But there's a quote in here that always sticks in my mind. Here. They saw no divine part of Christianity, but divinified humanity or humanized religion, and taught that man was perfectible, but childhood perfect. So to me, that sounds like Homo Pedophilus, saying that childhood is perfect and man is perfectible. But very interesting that they use the same language, right? That quote is not the authors of this book. That's Lord Acton, 1861. Man is perfectible. And then we got over here, Charles Galton Darwin, 1953, also saying that mankind has a perfectibility, the perfectibility of mankind, right? And it is well worth considering what the biological theory of heredity has to say about it. In discussing the non-inheritance of acquired characters in the last chapter, I cited the example of the training of dogs to do tricks. And I pointed out that the wise trainer would always use the dogs that learnt the tricks easily and would get rid of those that were slow learners. So the metaphor is, we're going to design our society and you have to fit into it and obey it. And if you can learn the rules and the behaviors of our society, then we'll keep you around. And if you can't, and you're a slow learner and you can't adapt to the situation that we're putting you in, then we're going to get rid of you. We're going to eliminate you. That's the view. That's the kind of, because him and his friends, they are the wise trainers of the humans, of humanity, right? That's what they see themselves as. I chose this example deliberately as being free from any ethical questions, such as must inevitably enter into all matters that concern humanity. So don't worry, let's get away from ethical questions, right? But still, it is interesting to see how it would apply to humanity when considerations induced from ethics are, for the moment, forgotten. So let's forget. So there again, considerations induced from ethics, let's forget them. Yeah, We're not worried about morals and ethics, right? We want to remove that from the conversation here. Just hear me out. Just hear me out, bro. A philanthropic dictator wants to perfect the innate moral qualities of the human race. How should he go about it? So here he is talking about dictators again. Second time. In this, he did the same in the chapter before. Following the example of the dog trainer, he will devote all his attention to the good children and he will neglect the worse ones, doing all he can to see that they do not succeed in life, and above all, that they are not permitted to hand on their inferior qualities to later generations. Actually, all too often, philanthropic effort goes in exactly the opposite direction, into curing the faults of the worst, without recognizing that the acquired characters so induced are quite impermanent. In saying this, I am thinking of the long-range policy, and I do not in the least want to belittle the self-sacrificing work that is done by so many noble workers in improving the conduct of the worst elements of the population. It may be justified as being a good in itself, and moreover, the existence of criminals perturbs very seriously the life of the rest of the community, so that everyone benefits if this nuisance is removed. Still, it is proper to note that the policy of paying most attention to the inferior types is the most inefficient way possible of achieving the perfectibility of the human race. So this is so what he's literally talking about here is eugenics. So ignore the ones you don't want and pay more attention to the ones that you do want. Nurture them, grow them, give them illustrious careers and influential jobs and luxurious lives and inheritances that they're allowed to keep. And all the people you don't want, make life very difficult, make it full of bureaucratic nonsense, hoops to jump through, rules and regulations and licenses that they have to apply for, control them down to getting rid of them. And the ones you do want, give them all the opportunity and the wealth and the comfort and the luxury because they deserve it, because they're specially, special blood, pure bloods. Turning now away from these narrower questions of biological heredity, consider the larger question of how education, in the wider sense, has affected and will affect history. Every man builds up a world of thought directing his conduct, which is partly formed from his own experience, but even more of it is acquired from his teachers, and in later life from friends and acquaintances or from books. I shall use the word creed to denote a set of tenets acquired in this general manner. I mean the word in an entirely colourless sense, with no question arising of whether the creed is true or untrue, moral or immoral. It is merely a body of philosophical thought, whether it is reasonable or unreasonable philosophy, which is strongly held and used as a main guide to conduct. There are, of course, creeds held by single individuals, but naturally the important ones are those held by large communities. Such creeds have produced and will again produce enormous effects on human history, and their influence must be considered. So I would just like to, that's a good bit to bear in mind. Remember that quote. Where do these creeds that the mass, because he's right, the most important thing is the creed that is held by most people, but where do these large communities get their creeds from? It's from characters like this and his family and his friends, right? They're giving the creeds to the large communities through the television, the newspapers, through the culture creation, through the organizations, the educational systems, the religious systems. All these systems are designed and provided to the large communities in order to provide them with the creed which will drive their behavior and their actions, right? Just going to have a sip. I've got a couple of quotes. The shaman anarchist. I think people have a built-in ethical compass, but morality is a societal construct. Okay. Thank you for the comment. I will think about that for sure. Yeah, I feel like babies, young people, children, they seem to be some sense of what right and wrong is, right? And fairness and injustice. When people lie or cheat or steal in a game, they can get very upset and emotional, and they can visibly, palpably sense and feel that that is wrong, quote unquote, but morality is societally constructed. Interesting. I don't know about that. But thanks. And good to see you here. I don't know if I've seen you in the chat before. Shaman Anarchist. Great name, by the way. And Katie Lane says, farmers use this method. Don't breed from the troublesome animals, right? Well, that's it. They kind of see themselves as farmers, right? The farmers of the human herd. All right, let's crack on. The first thing to notice about creeds is that they are quite inherited, but inherited according to curious laws quite different from the usual biological ones. A man is rather likely to hold the same creeds as his parents and relations, but no more than he is those of his teachers and his friends, whereas he has received his instincts and his inherent qualities from his ancestors and will share them with his blood relations. It will be pure accident if they happen to coincide with those of his friends. In this respect, a parallel can be drawn between creeds and languages, for a man is likely to speak the language of his parents, but he is quite as likely to speak that of his unrelated friends. A language is a simpler thing to analyze than a creed, and so it may be useful to follow the analogy further. Up to a point, the classification of languages resembles the classification of animals. Both can be divided into varieties, species, genera, and so on, and both gradually change their forms with the lapse of time, or they may branch out into several varieties, or they may become extinct. To this degree, they are similar, but the resemblance fails if it is taken further. Thus, the vocabulary of a language is sometimes a mixture derived from quite unrelated sources. Among animals, this would be as though a hybrid could be produced between a mammal and an insect. Again, sometimes wholly new words arise, derived from no traceable source, and presumably originating from the caprice of some inventor. For languages, the principle omne vivum ex vivo does not hold. Much the same would seem to be true of creeds. Like animals, they could be classified into varieties, species, and so on, and like them, they often show progressive modification, branching, and extinction. But on the other hand, there have often been hybridizations between quite unconnected creeds, and sometimes wholly new doctrines have arisen with no evident parentage at all. In fact, a new kind of heredity has come into existence, of quite a different type from that affecting animals, but of great importance to mankind. It appears to me that what I may call the natural history of creeds would be a very exciting study, and one meriting a great deal of attention. I have neither the psychological nor the historical knowledge to study the natural history of creeds in detail, and I shall therefore be content with giving a few examples of what I am trying to express. I select for my starting point an avowedly trivial example: the creeds about what food should be eaten. Why is it that we eat the flesh of certain animals and not of others? If anyone in Europe is offered a dish of dog's flesh, he will refuse it with something like horror, rationalizing his refusal perhaps by the explanation that the dog is a dirty animal. A Muslim will also refuse it, for him it would be immoral to eat it because it is prohibited by his scriptures. On the other hand, in certain parts of China, the dog is much prized as an article of diet. From what we know of other Chinese cooking, this shows that the taste of dog's flesh must be excellent. Nevertheless, there are very few of us who could be persuaded to try the dish. Contrast this with the reactions to the pig. For the Chinese, it is the most prized meat of all. For the European, nearly as much so, even though the pig is proverbially regarded as the typical dirty animal, whereas for the Muslim, it would again be immoral to eat it. Creeds about food are patently trivial, but this example does show, nevertheless, what a tremendously strong influence a creed has on our conduct. Creeds about more important things naturally have a very much greater compulsion. Those we hold firmly appear to us to have the inevitability of the propositions of formal logic. Anyone who does not happen to share our creeds is at the least regarded as an illogical fool, but more frequently as a perversely wicked person. It is this that has led to most of the terrible series of persecutions that have blackened the records of history. Creeds often arouse the most fanatical devotion. It is enthusiasm for his creed that has created the martyr. And, if we happen to share his creed, the martyr is regarded as one of the noblest of humanity. But the matter is not as simple as that, for this judgment has usually been prejudiced by the fact that we do sympathize with the martyr's creed, and it is necessary to look at the subject without this prejudice. The martyr is driven to make the ultimate sacrifice by his enthusiasm for his creed, but this enthusiasm has usually been evoked by the counter-enthusiasm of his persecutors, the majority in power, who hold an opposite creed with equal fervour. For every man who is willing to die for his faith, there will be 10 men who are willing to kill for their faith. The 10 feel that they are actuated by the same motive, the pure hatred of evil, as that of the martyr. And the main difference is only that for weak human nature, the role of the persecutor is easier than the role of the persecuted. But that there is no very great difference between the two is shown by many examples in history. For when the persecuted party has gained the upper hand, it has usually indulged in counter-persecution on a scale equal to that which it had itself suffered. I have cited the history of persecution as an example showing how intensely important creeds are as influences on human conduct. And in passing, another characteristic of them may be noted. This is that, though the infidel is hated, he is by no means so much hated as is the heretic. However, though such matters are interesting aspects of the natural history of creeds, for my present purpose, it would be out of place to follow them further. It will be noticed that I have not said anything at all about what is the fundamental question in regard to any creed, and that is whether it is true or false. For one who wants to believe in a creed, its truth is all that matters. But it is not this that matters for my purpose. In the past, there have been creeds, such, for example, as the belief in magic or divination, which have been very widely accepted. But we now know them to have been quite absurdly false. Yes, do we? Is that right? quite a sweeping generalization there. Who is we? Yet they have exerted the very greatest influence on human history. The species Homo has not changed, and there are still very many who are only too eager to believe in such things, not by any means all of them confined to the less advanced civilizations. And it must be expected that this tendency will continue to recur again and again. Yeah, why is that? Why, it's the arrogance that's coming through here, I would say. Real arrogance, because if these things pop up time and time again, regardless of the development or the wealth of a particular culture or country or nation or group of people, if it pops up time and time again, then maybe Charles Galton Darwin, CGD, maybe you're missing something here. Maybe you're the one who's overlooking that something is going on, that there is something that can be called magic or a spirit world or an ability to interact with that realm that is hidden and unseen, but all around us and part of reality. Okay, so he's just got this hyper rational, logical, arrogant worship of the intellect and the 5 sense reality, and if it can't be measured and tested, then it doesn't exist. But you can't prove the scientific method using the scientific method, right? There's certain things that we all use and rely upon. Logic. You can't prove logic by using the scientific method. So that's just reminding me and sounds to me like his arrogance coming through there. That's what I think anyway. And this is why, and then and this will be why he goes on to say that the question of truth is irrelevant to my purpose. So he's not bothered about truth. Who cares about truth, right? It doesn't matter what's true. Truth's relative, don't you know? Just like morals. Morals are relative. Truth is relative. So we don't need to know whether the creeds are true or not. Another tab. I didn't deliberately pick orange for this reason, but they do actually match the front cover and the style of the sleeve of this book. So how about that? What does matter is whether a creed, true or false, helps to the survival of its holder. And it is from this point of view that I shall try and study the natural history of creeds. Okay. So this is how you get into, like, this is moral relativism. You know, if I believe that I need to eat a baby once a week in order to live, and then I go on to have 20 children, old Charles Galton Darwin here is going to say, well, that's a good creed, and that is that improved the survivability, and therefore, you know, you can hold that creed, and we shall give it a tick and give it a thumbs up and say it's a good creed. I can best illustrate the importance of creeds for survival by beginning with an example which is avowedly much oversimplified. One of the tenets of the Society of Friends is that it is wrong to fight. Quakers, therefore, would not be killed in a war, whereas the believers of other faiths, without this prohibition, would lose a fraction of their numbers in every war. Religious faiths have a strong tendency to be adopted from the parents, and so in each succeeding generation there should be more Quakers in proportion to the rest of the population. And yet, there is no difference whatever in the makeup of the genes of the body cells of the two types. This example illustrates the way in which a creed might affect survival. It has, of course, been much oversimplified, and it must not be pushed too far. For if it were carried to the extreme, all the population would in the end be non-combatant, with no one to protect them from being destroyed by another race. A much more important example is the ancestor worship formerly prevalent in China. This imposed on a man the obligation to have a family in order that the worship of the shades of his ancestors might continue. With a population like the Chinese, in which its poorest members are always living on the edge of starvation, there must have been a much greater chance of survival for the children of the abler people, so that the creed would have a strongly eugenic effect. Contrast this with the state of Europe in the Middle Ages. There it was the custom for many of the ablest people to go into the church and so condemn themselves to sterility. Even if there was often laxity about the enforcements of celibacy, a priest's children would be illegitimate and so would be handicapped instead of being favoured in their chances of survival. This difference of creeds goes with a remarkable difference of histories, and it may well have been an important contributing factor to the difference. Both the Chinese and the Roman empires were attacked at various times by barbarians, and whereas the Roman Empire was so disruptive that it took nearly 1,000 years for civilization to return to it, the Chinese Empire absorbed its Mongol conquerors after only 2 generations. Is it not probable that it is largely on account of the creed of ancestor worship that the Chinese civilization has been the one in the world that has shown the most continuity, and the one that now has 1/5 of the whole human race? In the study of the natural history of the creeds of the past, it is inevitable to consider the religious creeds in particular, both because they are the ones that have roused the passions of humanity far the most, and also because we have much fuller records of them than of any others. It must be remembered that from the present point of view, the question of the truth or falsity of a religion is not directly relevant. The only question is its influence on the history of the human race. In each of the great religions of the world, however different their purely theological doctrines may be, there has been a general ethic which has exerted a steady and beneficent influence on its believers. The ethics of the different religions have not been very different, since their main aim is to inculcate the social virtues which are essential if life is to be tolerable in any community, large or small. For example, a virtuous Christian and a virtuous Muslim will have very similar standards of conduct dictated to them by their very different religions, and these standards will be hardly different from those dictated by the Confucian philosophy. The influence of these ethical principles has been immense, and, if I do not discuss them further, it is not for want of recognizing this influence. It is because they do seem to have worked out to the same consequences, no matter what the religion from which they started. Whereas an objective study of creeds must be primarily concerned with the different consequences that they may have produced. A greater interest attaches to the aspects of religious creeds where enthusiasm or even fanaticism has entered, because it is these enthusiasms that have been responsible for the most striking events in history. For the rest of this chapter, I shall use the word creed, therefore, in this more restrictive sense. So it's quite interesting here that he says this bit about how the fanaticism. So in the case of religion, the religious creed where enthusiasm and fanaticism has entered are of greater interest, because these have been responsible for the most striking events in history. But in other cases, like earlier, when he was talking about human societies and groups and cultures and behaviors, he was dismissing this kind of thing as what did he call them? Fluctuations. Question mark. He's saying in the case of religion, he's not interested in the average. You know, he's interested in averages everywhere, and the average is only the most important thing, and anything that varies above or below the average can be disregarded because it's a fluctuation, except for religion. In the case of religion, I am interested in the fanaticism and the enthusiasm, the outliers and the extreme cases, because that's responsible for striking events in history. So there's a bit of a double standard there, I think. Good evening, Hasdak. Good afternoon. Enjoy your time down the allotment. What a great way to spend a Saturday. Yeah, so to me, it seems like a bit of a double standard. Fluctuations, I would say no. In this case, he doesn't think the fanaticism, the enthusiasm is a fluctuation. It's actually more interesting than the average baseline sort of mindset and behavior of a religious person. Okay. In this narrower sense, creeds are almost like living things, possessing a course of life from birth through maturity to death. The analogy is imperfect in one respect, since all too often, after the general enthusiasm for the creed is dead, there is left behind a minority, a sort of fossilized rump, which continues to hold the doctrines of the creed for centuries afterwards. With this qualification, and perhaps with other exceptions, it would seem a rough generalization that creeds tend to live for 2 or 3 centuries, or to express it in biological measure, for not more than about 10 generations. Consider some of the creeds that have flourished excessively inside the Christian religion. In the 4th and 5th centuries, there were fanatical creeds associated with metaphysical questions of the nature of the deity, and men were ready to die and to kill for the sake of subtle questions, incomprehensible to us now, connected with the nature of the Trinity. As time went on, this creed reached its old age and tended to become a political persecution, not of individuals, but of whole nations, such as those that had adopted the Arian heresy. Then again, in the 11th century, there were the Crusades, a more fitting creed for the semi-barbarous peoples of Western Europe. They lasted about 2 centuries, and also degenerated in the end into a political instrument for rival Christian parties, who by that time had little left of the original enthusiasm against Islam. Then there is the Reformation, which started towards the beginning of the 16th century. Some may hold that we are still too near the Reformation to pronounce an opinion on its present vitality, but it is certain that its colour had very materially changed within little more than a century, for the 30 Years' War was a war for power, not for religion, even though it was largely between Protestants and Catholics. It would be most interesting to study whether there were similar growths and decays of creeds in Islam or Buddhism, and also to study the behaviour of such creeds as philosophical Stoicism, which never provoked the same fierce fanaticism as did the religious creeds. Another feature of creeds seems to be rather general. Though the majority of a population, say something like 9/10, accept their creed implicitly and regard it as part of the law of nature, there is always a small minority who do not. Most people call them the sheep, follow the ideas of their leaders unquestioningly. So there you go. Even Charles Galton Darwin was calling people sheep. But this minority, the goats, interesting, he uses sheep and goats. All right. Interesting symbolism. So the people who question things and go against the leaders, or at least ask questions, they're goats. And they go by contraries, and they disbelieve anything just because those around them believe it. So the contrary type of personality who thinks and questions and goes against the grain, goes against the general direction and flow of popular opinion, right? You're a goat if you do that. The goats are often not very pleasant people, but they are usually above the average of intelligence. It is probably the corroding influence of the goats that gradually saps the vitality of a creed by its cumulative infection, and indeed there may well be a proportionality between the number of goats in a community and the lifespan of the creed of the sheep in that community. Very interesting paragraph, because the implication is, because he says here, the goats are often not very pleasant people, the implication is that therefore the sheep are pleasant. Which is probably an idea you want to spread and inculcate into people if you are of the class, the farming, controlling, managerial class, right? Oh, we like the good sheep, the good obedient sheep that don't question their leaders. We don't like those disagreeable goats who keep asking us those annoying questions and getting us to explain ourselves. We don't like them. They're not very pleasant. Not very pleasant. But at least they're above average of intelligence. So there's a bit of that's interesting admission there as well, right? Yeah, Bitcoin mining, exactly, the greatest of all time. GOAT, greatest of all time. GOAT, the GOAT. There's that popped up all over the place in the last, I think it was a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I was seeing it there was a Lynx deodorant, for example, that was called GOAT, GOAT, greatest of all time. It's also obviously a symbol of, often used as a symbol of Satan, or Satanism is the goat, and the goat's head being overlaid onto the downward pointing pentagram, right? With the beard at the bottom, and then the two ears coming down, and then the two horns at the top. So the goat, the downwards pointing pentagram. And also then you've got the symbolism of Satan and just rebelling against God, or Lucifer. I know they're different mythologically, but the angel that first rebelled against God and said, I will not obey, like here, I will not obey the law. I will not obey, I will question the leader. And then boom, you're out of here. You're out of heaven, you're going down to hell. And now you're represented by a goat. So yeah, an interesting paragraph there. Sheeps and goats. At least the goats are credited with above average intelligence. So bear that in mind, everybody out there who is unquestioningly listening to and believing everything that politicians say. You're actually below average intelligence if you do that, and it would be above average intelligence to ask more questions and demand better answers. Bitcoin mining says Baphomet, exactly. And Shaman Antichrist says docile sheep equals good, questioning goats equals bad. Yep. Continuing. In future history, the constancy of human nature makes it certain that man will continue to be dominated by enthusiasm for creeds of one kind or another. He will persecute and be persecuted again and again for the sake of ideas, some of which, to later ages, will seem of no importance and even unintelligible. But there is one much more valuable aspect of creeds that must be noticed. They serve to give a continuity to policy. They serve to give a continuity to policy far greater than can usually be attained by intellectual conviction. There are many cases in history of enlightened statesmen who have devoted their lives to carrying through some measure for the general good. They may have succeeded, only to find that the next generation neglects all they have done, so that it becomes undone again in favor of some quite different way of benefiting humanity. The intellectual adoption of a policy thus often hardly survives for more than a single generation, and this is too short a period for such a policy to overcome the tremendous effects of pure chance. But if the policy can arouse enough enthusiasm to be incorporated in a creed, then there is at least a prospect that it will continue for something like 10 generations, and that is long enough to give a fair probability that it will prevail over the operations of pure chance. Thus, a creed may have the rudiment of the quality, possessed by the genes of mankind, of being able to produce a permanent effect on humanity. If the history of the future is not regarded as the automatic unfolding of a sequence of uncontrollable events, and few of us would accept this inevitability, then anyone who has decided what measures are desirable for the permanent betterment of his fellows will naturally have to consider what is the best method of carrying his policy through. Okay, this is tricky. Let me go back and read that. It's quite a long, complicated sentence. I've just noticed we've got Yiz the Eunuch in the chat. Welcome. Very good to see you here. Thank you for joining. Okay. We're just picking apart this long, complicated sentence here. So if the history of the future is not regarded as the automatic unfolding of a sequence of uncontrollable events, and few of us would accept that. So he's saying the history is not there is the potential to influence the events of history, right? It's not just an unfolding that is predetermined and we can do nothing about it. So, and here where he's saying a few of us, I have a feeling he's speaking to the inner circles, the inner scientific elite, his friends, the Huxleys, for example, and the other Galtons and Darwins. Then anyone who has decided what measures are desirable for the permanent betterment of his fellows. So this makes me think of the dictators that he's been talking about in this chapter and the one before. Making a decision about what measures are desirable for the permanent betterment of his fellows. So, for example, they might decide that more docile, unquestioning sheep is a good thing is a good way to get the permanent betterment of his fellows. Then if the dictator did decide that he wanted more docile, unquestioning sheep, then he'll naturally have to consider what is the best method of carrying his policy through. Okay, so what's the method of churning out more unquestioning sheep? There are 3 levels at which he might work. The first and weakest is by direct, conscious political action. His policy is likely to die with him, and so to be ineffective. Okay, so the first direct, conscious political action is going to die with him. That's a no-go. The second is by the creation of a creed, since this has the prospect of lasting for quite a number of generations, so that there is some prospect of really changing the world a little with it. All right, so a creed has more longevity than the direct political action. The third would be by directly changing man's nature. All right, there you go. Let's change the nature of man altogether. Get rid of those goats and get more of those sheep. Working through the laws of biological heredity, and if this could be done for long enough, it would be really effective. So that is just eugenics or dysgenics or some combination of the two. Dysgenics for them, eugenics for us, I've misspelled dysgenics there. How embarrassing. So directly changing man's nature, working through the laws of biological heredity, and if this could be done for long enough, it would be effective. But even if we knew all about man's genes, which we certainly do not, a policy of this kind would be almost impossible to enforce even for a short time, and since it would take many generations to carry it through, it would almost certainly be dropped long before any perceptible effects were achieved. Oh, that's a shame. That is why creeds are so tremendously important for the future. A creed gives the best practical hope that a policy will endure well beyond the life of its author. And so it gives the best practical hope that man can have for really controlling his future fate. Excellent. All right, that's chapter 6, all done and dusted. Creeds being the best mechanism and method by which man can control his future fate. I like the way here it sort of suggests that man is controlling his own future fate and overlooking the very likelihood of him of this guy writing this book to talk about how he and his friends are actually controlling the fate of the rest of us, because I think that is really what's going on here. But quite an interesting analysis here that changing man's nature is just too hard to do, but you can plant a creed in there. And I think actually one of the phrases that springs to mind that I learned from Yiz and your discussions on the Empire of Lies with Mr. Newsfist is like a meme pathogen, like a mind virus, an idea that gets planted and then is repeated and spread. That kind of sounds to me similar to the idea that he's getting at in this chapter when he's talking about creeds and how they can be used to spread and last and outlive the author, right? So you can implant a meme pathogen or a mind virus into the culture, get people talking about it, write books on it, plant that seed, teach it to young people via the education system, as you just pointed out, Katie Lane, in the chat. And then that will do the job for you of changing behavior and getting more docile, obedient, sheep-like people and getting them to castigate and throw out and blame and point the finger at the questioning above average intelligence goats out there. All right. So another fantastic chapter. The next chapter we're going to be going on to is chapter 7, which is man, a wild animal. But we're not going to be doing that today. All right, let me have a sip and then we'll have a final review of comments and we'll wrap it up. I don't think we've got too much new stuff coming. Oh, I can see Heidi over on Rumble. Hello, Heidi. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate it very much. Oh, okay. So the second is ecumenism, Heidi says. Ecumenism, which is one world religion that has no principles other than we're all one. Yeah, I'm not quite sure which part of the video that refers to, but he does talk a lot in this book about how the human race is just one human race. There's no differences between the blacks, the browns, the whites, and the yellows, as he describes it. There's no differences between nations. And in fact, even if there are differences, who cares? Because the important thing is the average, the baseline average. Anything that is above or below that baseline average, he calls a fluctuation, and it can be ignored and disregarded because it doesn't help us apply statistics and probability in order to extrapolate what's going to happen over the next million years, which is like his methodology in the book. But I think that's a really good word to throw out there, Heidi. Ecumenism, this uniting, this bonding, this blending of all the systems of into one. But the only way of doing this is to water them all down, so that you get this kind of weak gray amalgamation of nothing. And it reminds me of what, like, corporate language, the kind of language that you get in the corporate world and all their documentation and their public releases. It's words we all know and recognize, but there's no meaning behind any of it. So you can read these documents, these corporate documents and press releases, and they always go on about their vision and their values, and they're real words that you can find in the dictionary, but in the context, there's nothing concrete behind them, because it's just words. And I feel like that's what we will end up with if people don't get very precise in their language, precise in the way they speak, the way they talk, how they describe things, what they say. I think we're going to end up with this gray blobby sort of, I don't know. I don't even know words to describe it, because it's like the Orwell society of 1984, where there's no expression of anything other than what is approved and what is allowed. It's that kind of society. I think that's where it would all lead. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed those chapters. Yeah, exactly. Bitcoin Miner says, in the name of diversity. Yeah. So, in Orwell's 1984, you've got war is peace, ignorance is strength. And then they need to add into that as well. They need to add diversity is unity. That's the new one, I think. Yeah, homogeneity, making everything homogeneous, blending it all together so that, and you can see it already. You get on a plane, you fly across the world, you walk out of the plane, and there's a Starbucks and a McDonald's and a Burger King and a KFC there. And you like, there was the same set of restaurants and businesses and brands in the airport that you just flew from, right? So it's just, it is happening that you fly across to a business meeting on the other side of the world, and they're wearing shirts and ties and sitting in an office that looks the same as the one you just left behind and flew, in across the hemisphere to this new place, but it looks the same. And you're conducting your business in English, right? So people are using the same language. So it is fully in effect right now, this system of homogenizing everything. It's the same thing they do to milk is the same thing they want to do to us. And remember, like, his initial image that he used in the introduction was of gas molecules in a container. And he said, this is the image that he's going to use to describe humans. The masses of humanity, each individual human is just a molecule that is bouncing around in this container, which is Earth. And when we look at the sheer number of these molecules, these humans, we can extrapolate out their behaviors and look at the averages, and then we can see what's coming in the future. But I think it is more of this is the plan and what we're going to do, rather than this could be what happens and this is my prediction, right? So that's the way I'm reading it, and I think you would agree. So I think that's about it for today. I think we're going to wrap it up. Get on with our Saturday. It is lunchtime here, so I'm going to go and find something tasty to eat. Thank you all very much for hanging out. I very much appreciate it. Moto Marty says superfluous. Thank you. I haven't seen you in the chat before, which is why I thought I would give you a shout out there. Moto Marty, superfluous. That is a good word. Homogeneous, shaman anarchist. That's a mouthful. The global village full of global citizens where everyone thinks and looks the same. Yeah, exactly. Well said. Thank you, Bitcoin Mining. I appreciate your kind words. You've been here since you were the first comment, apart from Frank. No one ever gets here before Frank. So you just got to accept that. But yeah, Bitcoin Mining, you were here right at the beginning, and I appreciate that for you sticking through for the whole thing. That's very kind of you to do so, and I hope you did get some value from that. So we're plowing on with the book. We're at page 115 now, so I think we're halfway through, which means we'll probably get this done over the course of the next 3 streams. We'll be probably wrapping it up next Saturday, which is the schedule at the minute. Fascinating stuff. 1953. A lot of predictions which seem to have been, his predictions are pretty on the money. Let's put it that way. A lot of things he said might happen, could happen. They have come to pass. And so quite revealing and powerful stuff. So let's wrap it up there. I appreciate you all very much. If you are in the business of helping support independent content creators such as myself, then there's allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews where you can find ways to do that. But the main thing is to just, get yourself some books, preserve them, look after them, treasure them, read them, teach other people what's in them. That's the main message that I want to communicate to people. We're heading into this AI-driven censorship, industrial, complex, digital prison system very quickly. And I think a good hedge against that is to have physical copies of physical books when the internet is totally scrubbed of any good information and anybody speaking the truth. We can keep that flame alive and that torch alive and pass it on through the use of actual physical copies of books. So get out there and do some book hunting this weekend. Maybe secondhand shops, charity shops here in the UK. There's all sorts of things. You never know what you're going to find. So that would be my parting message. I'll be back for another stream, continuing with Next Million Years on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. And then I'm also going to be taking part in a discussion this evening on the Cutting Through the Matrix Telegram chat book club, where we're talking about Chapter 8 of Tragedy and Hope, International Socialism. That should be good fun. Always, it's usually an hour and a half, and they get posted to Melissa's Cutting Through the Matrix YouTube, BitChute, and Rumble channels after the fact. So I'm doing that tonight. So take it easy. Enjoy yourselves, look after yourselves and each other. And until I see you on the next one, hope everything is good. All right. Take care. God bless.